Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our next installment of Interview with an Exorcist. I'm John Barnwell, and I'm here with Dr. Douglas Gabriel in the greater Detroit metropolitan area. We've been exploring the islands of Hawaii over the last few episodes and the attendant challenges that Douglas went through in his initiation. And it seems as though for him, it's not enough just to go through a psychological initiation, but he has to go through the whole physical transformation. And sometimes we're like that. We tend to have kind of thick skulls, and we get so self-involved that we can't unlock those wholesome forces that are so much a part of what we've been discussing. Douglas, how are you?
I'm good, John. That's exactly right, and also then there's the third part, which is just letting go. I mean, initiation and illness are actually sometimes considered to be extremely similar. And if we talk about the physical body, the life body, the body of desire is called the astral body, and the ego. So the physical, etheric, astral, and ego. Your health is dependent upon what your ego is sending down through your astral body into your etheric body, into your physical body. So being a thick-skulled person like myself, I literally had to ram my head into the wall, to believe the wall was there, And so what we're going to hear today is, in my opinion, the greatest initiation rite. So if you've not been initiated and you simply want to go through what it would feel like to be initiated, get the book, The Most Holy Trinity Sophia by Comte de Saint-Germain, one of the only extant writings that we have of this great master, and read it. And what you're going to find out today, I'm asking John to read the first paragraph of the opening to it, because it is exactly the same thing I went through in Hawaii. Yes.
And this is another one of his manuscripts that's, of course, virtually unobtainable, but it's out there somewhere.
I was just going to tell you the story before the button got turned on. When I was with Manly P. Hall, because I loved him so much and I'd spent so much time reading all of his books, I took his great big book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, with a mic, with a, what do you call it? A magnifying glass. So I would not miss one single word in the whole book. I read it twice, and that is a big book. But it basically gives you a full expose on the mystery centers and the old mythologies and the old beliefs. And then you can have a perspective, because we shouldn't forget the past. So anyway, the Comte de Saint-Germain was big into Masonry at one point, and he wrote this initiation rite. And it is now available. You can get it through Amazon. You can even get it for free online. And it's very worthwhile reading. And when you hear this, you're going to say, wait a second. Did Doug just make that stuff up after he read Comte de Saint-Germain's book? It will sound as if I just literally tried to copy that. Trust me, I didn't. I knew of that book. I wasn't hyper aware of it. But also in that book is my favorite poem, because it's the alchemical poem. So if you want to study initiation, read this book. If you want to have alchemy put into a single meditative poem, it's also in this book, and it's by Saint-Germain. And we're going to have John read that at the end of this, because basically that is what is really going on here. What is initiation? Initiation can look like you're going insane. Initiation can look like you're sick. Initiation can be extraordinarily painful. It can rip you to pieces with earth, water, air, and fire. At least 4 times you're going to think that you're possibly going to die when you're in the process of initiation. And basically that's what I was going through physically. So why I had to do that, probably because I was just a dunderhead and I stayed in Hawaii instead of finishing my round the world trip. And then, of course, I got introduced to Vajrayogini. Well, Vajrayogini, as I said before, that is not the initiation you wish to study unless you are ready to have your life lit on fire. You're going to turn on fire if you start to study Vajrayogini. And when you go to Hawaii, if you go to the Big Island, you're going to turn on fire with Pele. And so these initiations as you enter in, they usually start at the mouth of a cave, and you enter into darkness. What is that darkness? That's yourself. That's you, your ego, leaving the realms of light and entering into, just like as a perfect example right there in that picture. And the two caves, John could explain this as a very alchemical picture, but also, you can see the caduceus, but it's a very, very deep picture. That alone, with these symbols that we have from the past, you could, if you understood what those symbols meant, it could invoke in you an initiation right there on the spot. And then your astral body, because your astral and ego can leave your body at night when you sleep, and your etheric and physical lie in the bed, generally speaking. And so when you can separate consciously your astral from your etheric, you're going to have an initiation experience. You're going to meet the threshold. You're going to meet the angel Phanuel, who is the archangel of initiation. And it's a little bit different than what we've been talking about in terms of meeting the guardian of the threshold, meeting Michael, or meeting Christ at the threshold. But this process of initiation is when you yourself say, I chose to go up and look into the volcano. I chose to go up and throw stuff into the caldera, an active with stuff blasting out, which could have blown my head off. Okay, so I chose these initiations. So why should I be surprised that I got sick? That's silly of me. And then I wouldn't leave. Well, okay. I mean, if you keep doing something over and over again, expecting a different result, that's the definition of psychosis. So was I psychotic at that time? Very possibly, because the island Vogue was making me sick. It was causing my astral to separate from my etheric. And that is also the answer to people's questions in after our last talk, which is, how can a picture that Barbara and John sent to Daedalus, and Daedalus just holds the picture, how can that be sent from him in Cyprus to you in Detroit? We're going to talk about that further as we go along. But John, why don't you give us a little introduction there with what someone might experience if they wish to have a self-created initiation?
From the Most Holy Trinity Sophia by the Comte de Saint-Germain, as translated by Manly Palmer Hall. It was night. The moon, veiled by dark clouds, cast but an uncertain light on the crags of lava that hemmed in the Solfatara. My head covered with the linen veil, holding in my hands the golden bough. I advanced without fear towards a spot where I had been ordered to pass the night. I was groping over hot sand, which I felt give way under my every step. The clouds gathered overhead, lightning flashed through the night and gave to the flames of the volcano a blood-like appearance. At last, I arrived, and I found an iron altar where I placed the mysterious bough. I pronounced the formidable words. Instantly, the earth trembles under my feet. Thunder peals. Vesuvius roars in answer to the repeated strokes. Its fires join the fires of lightning. The choirs of the genii rise into the air and make the echoes repeat the praises of the Creator. The hallowed bough which I had placed on the triangular altar suddenly is ablaze. A thick smoke envelops me. I cease to see. Wrapped in darkness, I seem to descend into an abyss. I know not how long I remained in that situation. When I opened my eyes, I vainly looked for the objects which surrounded me a little time ago. The altar, Vesuvius, the country round Naples, had vanished far from my sight. I was in a vast cavern, alone, far away from the whole world. Nearby me lay a long white robe. Its loosely woven tissue seemed to be of linen. On a granite boulder stood a copper lamp upon a black table covered with Greek words indicating the way I was to follow. I took the lamp, and after having put on the robe, I entered a narrow passage.
And it goes on from there. He walks through a 3-mile tunnel, comes to a door, has to go through this door, later on has to go through water up to his neck, and later on has to go through these hot areas where he thinks he's going to burn up. Later on, there's all these sounds and winds and all these things. And then he comes to a chamber. And it's exactly, I reread it this morning, it's exactly the same chamber that I had in my dream that told me I was supposed to have a child, which was the last thing I would ever desired to do. Okay. And I'm like arguing the whole time. So you enter the cave. There's still a little light. That's your head. Then you go into the really deep cave where Vesuvius disappears. Everything disappears. All is gone because you're in your own realm. What's that? Your heart. And then you have to go through all the winding cave. What's that? That's your metabolic. And then you go through this chamber and that chamber. What's that? Those are your organs. So what's being described here is literally what you can do in your own bedroom, in your own prayer closet, in your own meditation room. And everyone can do it. And you will, it's basically, it's kind of like these are the stages, but oftentimes it doesn't go in order. So you enter into this, and when you read the initiations of, say, in Masonry, what happens? At one point, Hiram in the story leaps into the brazen sea and has to sink down into it and goes down to see Cain, who killed Abel, and then comes back up with the secrets of metals. Well, what is that? That's when the human consciousness attempts to go into the core of the earth. And if you do, you had better be careful. I told you what happened to me just looking at it. You know, to enter into this, the second realm of the realm of destruction and the 9 levels of the earth, who can handle that? And unfortunately, this is what we have to handle, because the 9 layers, which I told you, I went through 9 layers of vertigo, but way beyond anything you'd call vertigo. Okay. And that's an excellent book. You had something to do with that book, didn't you? That guy's a friend of yours, Paul O'Leary. Yeah, that's an excellent book on it. And then there's Adolf Aronson's book on it. There's, which one's that? Transformation of Evil by, Sigismund von Gleich. Yes, that's the other one. I forgot about that one. So there are at least 4 good anthroposophic books on the interior of the earth if you wish to do that. Now, before you do that, because that'll probably depress you, yeah, right there, study an esoteric cosmology and get to know that one goes into the inner layers of the earth also. But study the hierarchy, the 9 hierarchy, because going up is the same as going down, except that one is going into supernature, one is going into subnature. Do we need to go into subnature? Well, first off, initiation is into supernature. And what are you going to experience there? Angels, archangels, and archai in your thinking, feeling, and willing through moral imagination, moral inspiration, moral intuition. Plus, you can talk to the superhuman beings that Steiner says have started to come into this realm since about the time of the regency of the Archangel Michael becoming our time spirit. So you have this ability to enter into yourself and at the same time go up or down. In the way that I look at this, your heart is the middle. You can go up with superconsciousness with your frontal spinal column, which is basically connected to the vagus nerve, or you can go down into the subterranean realms. And what happens there? First off, you have to get through the crust of the earth. That's your old crusty self, and then you have to go to the realm of total destruction. Are you ready to go to a realm where even if you throw metal onto magma, it vaporizes it? Are you ready to pass through that? There was a guy, I just read his book yesterday. Wonderful guy, T.H. Meyer, wrote a book called, Barefoot Through Hot Lava. And he says that's what the master told him after he went to these volcanoes, Vesuvius, Stromboli, and Etna. And he wanted to understand these inner layers. Why? Because he was seeking initiation, of course. And what did he get told by the master who left him a little note? That exact phrase, walking barefoot through hot lava. But in the story, he also mentions that Rudolf Steiner says, don't forget that we are dancing on a volcano. Now, why is that important? Because the earth is alive. And no matter how far you go down, which you can't go far unless you're an initiate, But even if you went all the way to the core of the earth, those 9 levels, those are the 9 basically evil levels. They're in many cases the opposite of what we have as we go up. But when you get to the core, here's the problem. The scientists tell you it's iron nickel because of the magnetic field of the earth. Incorrect. We don't know what it is. That's a theory. What they now believe is that it is a white hole, and that it is, they believe it's 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit. No, complete nonsense, just like what they think about the sun. So the reality is, Rudolf Steiner said, that we need to, once we have gone in through the solar plexus, into the spinal column, up to the head, and you have gained that holy grail up there, you get the sword that is laying on that. In the story of Christian Rosenkreuz, there's a sword or a spearhead and a cup laying on the table. So you get the spear, and Rudolf Steiner says you get the sword and you have to strike it into your heart. You have to come back and strike your heart until it bleeds, and your heart, of course, is that chalice. So you're in this area. But if you go into the area below, you're going into the realm of darkness, incredible darkness, fear, doubt, hatred, demonology, the fiery realms that completely invert everything, that are the mirror image of everything we see that is good in this world and in the spiritual world, is inverted as you go into the earth. So it's not a place you really want to go, but that's where people go when they get sick, because they're wrestling with the fact that they're somewhere in between an angel and the level of magma, the realm of destruction. And we're in between there, and we go back and forth in between there, and we vacillate in between illness and health. But the reality is that your ego never needs to go down into that realm. Your ego, which is really, as John has pointed out in the 19th lecture of second volume of Karma of Untruthfulness, great thing, John. I went and read that this morning. That is so apropos to what we're talking about today, because he says that the solar plexus is where your ego is held. And that's also where you get psychological illnesses, because you can't resolve basically your relationship to the outside world. And that's where your sun, that's where your heart is. That's where your center of your I am is, even though he would also tell us it's in the blood. He says in this lecture, solar plexus also rules the blood. So anyway, that's what I think happened. And this, I've only come to this realization in like the last few days when you and I have been talking about this, going back and reading some things, reading some other books and thinking, oh yeah, I've chosen all these illnesses. That's why illness is a blessing, because as Tyler always says, the sicker I get afterwards, the better work I do.
Yeah, it's don't do this at home. Yeah, when you start looking at a spiritual scientific view of things, you come up with some different ideas regarding how this is all put together. And I'll give you a few pointers that should help. As Douglas said, that the ego, it finds its closest and most intimate relationship to your vehicles in the solar plexus, which is like your nerves and your plexus of the autonomic nervous system. And the pathology of that, when it's not properly in harmony, is spite, cunning, wiliness, fraudulence, giving prominence to oneself, and putting everyone else in the shade, and so on. Whereas if you go to the etheric body, which is your brain and the cranial nerves, he says the etheric body, when it is freed, has mainly Ahrimanic characteristics. Envy, jealousy, avarice, and similar states will be pathologically exaggerated, always in connection with a kind of spreading into the environment, a kind of letting oneself go. And then, of course, there's the astral body and its relationship to the spinal cord and the spinal nerves. And he says when the astral body is released, this leads to volatility of ideas and lack of cohesive thought. Manic states on the one hand, or on the other, withdrawal, depression, hypochondria. And regarding all of this, he says Psychiatry today has of yet no means of distinguishing between these three forms of soul sickness. Psychiatry will only achieve some degree of perfection when distinction is made between psychological abnormalities brought about by the freeing from bondage of the etheric body or the astral body or the ego. And the point he's making is that as a result of the fall and that whole cosmic event that we went through that gave us our freedom in the first place, nonetheless, that puts us in a precarious position because at these centers, these are where these things are held in check by the proper integration of your vehicles. And if you end up with an improper integration of them, then those certain pathologies that I just listed from that 19th lecture of the karma of untruthfulness. So you have some very important considerations as far as to gain insights into how much of what you're going through is a result of your own psychological state and not really actually a health issue in the normal sense of some kind of medical problem. And when you start looking at this, and he says the real key to overcoming these challenges is to be more concerned with the wellness of the world at large than with your own personal being.
Yes, and these three centers, he points out, in the future will become the centers of our consciousness. There'll be basically three elements to what a human, when they turn into an angel, will be. And one is the heart, or the solar plexus. One is the third eye, or the head. And the next one is, I don't really want to give too much of an explanation of it, but let's say your entire metabolic system, your limbs, and everything kind of folds up into you sitting in lotus. That's would look like a ball. But your left hand will become, through the spinal column, the tool for motivation for moving around. So you'll only have three what are called chakras. Now, if you take a picture, anyone can do this, look up nerve system and then hit image. You will see that it is a perfect picture of the chakras as described by the ancients. And so anyone who thinks we don't have chakras must think we don't have nerves too. Every nerve cluster or the ganglia, they call it, and the ones which they say are the bigger, more powerful ones, well, they have more nerve activity and larger ganglia. So in the heart and the solar plexus is the largest. But the brain itself has also that capacity, but you have to know where in the brain to see it. You'd have to look at the way the pineal gland bounces off the corpus callosum, which creates that particular chakra. But the chakras are exactly as the nerves show. And so they come in through the back and they come out from the front. Now, if you want to leave your body like Daedalus did to heal me, or at least separate his astral from his etheric, he had already built these, created these balls of healing that he kept up in the corner of the room. And he took that, he obviously put it in his body, went through the connective tissue of hyperconnectivity that we all have, and we can explain that, whether you want to call it ormus or spiritual spores or whatever you want to call it. All of us are all connected, period. And it's called quantum entanglement. So anyone you ever shared a vibration with, that vibration continues, and that vibration is your connection to that person. So how is it that you can do that? That you leave through your solar plexus, and the ego, in a very luciferic way, comes out of your body and can either go crazy or it can go help people. He called it exomatosis. And that was my experience when I was young. I've described this to you all, is that at night when I'd sleep, I was dreaming when I was awake in the day, and I was awake at night. And so I was communing with beings who would say, can you come over here and do this, do that, help do this, do that? So that's exomatosis. Well, that's different. When Edgar Cayce was healing someone, the great psychic healer that he was, he would lie down, put his hands over his heart, say a verse from the Bible, I think probably from St. John, I can't remember the exact verse he'd say. He'd go into a trance. The person, and he's lying down, the person next to him would say somebody's name, John Barnwell, who lives at 1234 Happy Road in Happyville, America. he would take a second, he'd go there, check the person out, come back and give a complete diagnosis of them, and then tell what it was that could heal them from old ancient remedies, which are, we still understand that Edgar Cayce's remedies to this day are some of the most effective you can get, and they're based upon old traditions. So he could go anywhere in the world, check out anybody. It was almost instantaneous, and literally 100% of the time was accurate with what his description of what the person was going through, and then could go into the soul realm and then even talk about previous incarnations if that was a question that the person had. Why? Because your ego creates your health. Your ego creates your illness. So if you have been hung up in a previous incarnation, maybe Cayce's going to tell you what that was about so you can work on that and maybe overcome it and then overcome your illness.
Yeah, there's even accounts of Edgar Cayce recommending to an individual a certain medication, and they go look for it, and they go to the company, and the company would say, "How do you know about that? We haven't released it yet." Well, yeah, he was great. He especially significant was the recommendation he did for iodine, and they call it etomidine. And what they do is they use an electrolysis process, and it causes a separation of the molecular structure of the iodine and makes it more readily assimilable. But I take iodine on a daily basis. Rudolf Steiner he has given indications that it was iodine that helped to bring about the consolidation of the etheric body at the point of the brow in proper harmony. And so it's interesting because you can look into modern paleontology, and they talk about how cultural developments, that the more advanced cultures were next to the sea, and that they were eating fish from the sea and seaweed and things of that nature, so that it enabled Stone Age man to go through certain phases of development more readily. And so there's a great mystery in nature that we can lock into, but it's not always what we seem. I want to share a short thing here from the True and False Paths in Spiritual Investigation, Form and Substantiality, the Mineral Kingdom in relation to the levels of consciousness in man. It was given at Torquay in England in August 13, 1924, Collected Works 243, where he says, "Outwardly, we see the crystal formations of the metals in the mineral world, but we know inwardly that the forces of gold, which are finely distributed over the earth, sustain our heart and maintain the normal consciousness in our daily life. And so we can say gold works upon the heart center of man. On the basis of this information, we are now in a position to start our investigations. It would be untrue to state that the earth is your sole habitat. It is the heart that anchors your consciousness to the earth. That which has its center in the larynx is out in the cosmos, and situated further out is that which has its center in the forehead, tin. That is not the reality. It's not the head as such, but its physical aspect that belongs to the earth. The head consciousness extends from the larynx upwards far out into the universe. The universe reveals itself solely in the head center. What determines your human condition between birth and death is the heart center." I know that's kind of a deep one to lay on people, but these things are nice to contemplate. In fact, I think that women have an easier time of it than the guys. The guys always want to try and analyze exactly what he's talking about. But in living in these imaginations, like those sequences from the Comte de Saint-Germain, if we can develop an imaginative picture of these things, it's going to take us much farther than trying to come out with some measure, number, and weight analysis.
And the reason the head is where you can contact the cosmos and everything that is spiritual is because it's a mirror, but it needs to be empty, not full of your normal thoughts. It needs to be filled with sense-free thinking, non-earth-bound thinking. And so you need to focus on the virtues. because a virtue like grace or mercy or love is not something physical.
Another way to look at initiation, especially those of us who have been gardening now, you just look at a little seed and you'll realize that that seed has the potential to produce fruit that can feed you. And then you could take a fruit from that and multiply it out and on and on. Or better yet, the seed of a sequoia tree is so tiny. And from it comes this tree. And what I'm saying is what the process of initiation is the way that you are a seed. You just don't know what you're going to become yet. So imagine big. Imagine you're that little sequoia tree becoming the tallest one on the planet. It's really amazing. And that having been said, remember that the seed must be buried in the earth before it can begin its trajectory upwards.
Absolutely. In darkness of the earth, then that's the earth initiation. The water comes in, and what does that do? Oh, that's not good. It swells it till it explodes. Oh, but if it doesn't explode, it can't live. And it explodes into darkness. And then what does the little seed do? It's so desperate to get to the light, right? The dicotyledons come up, and with a force that we can't understand, that force can break through cement, through concrete. The force of a growing plant can grow through a rock. Now, go ahead, try to figure that one out. And then when it comes up, what does it do? It enters in the air of realm, the realm of air, right? And the realm of warmth for the sun. And what's it trying to do? It's using the foundation of the earth to get back to where it came from, which is our star and the other celestial stars around it, because that's what imprints the form into a star. And then the motion that we see in a plant is the motion of the upward and then falling back motion of the planets as they relate, and the way that those particular planets, for instance, there's 7 basic types of trees for the 7 planets. So you get these correspondences going. And what does the seed go through? Exactly as Tyler just said, the full initiation. But did the seed cry when you put it in the dark cave into the ground? Did it cry when it swelled with the water and exploded and thought it was going to die? Did it cry when it woke up in darkness and had to climb for its life to the light? No, it got the reward of air and warmth, and then it saw its home. And that's all we're doing. Basically, the analogy of the seed, if you can see that in your mind, that's one of the couple exercises, Rosicrucian exercises, Steiner gives, to see the plant in its entire cycle. And if you know the cycle of starches and sugars and proteins and the whole thing, and you're looking at this, watching one seed come to birth in a plant, come to blossom, create more seeds, fall to the ground, and start the cycle again, that's basically all you need to know. That's who you are.
Yes, that's the great Mysterium Magnum, the great mystery. And in his Spiritual Science and Medicine, Lecture 6, in March 26, 1920 in Dornach, that's volume Collected Works 312, he says, one tendency is earthwards, and I have already suggested that in trees, the main stem forms a sort of excrescence of the earth, so that the flowers and leaves are rooted in the trunk, just as herbs and plants of lower types are rooted in the earth. There is this tendency of the plant toward the earth, but on the other hand, the plant has an impulse upwards, away from the earth. Accordingly, if we accept light as the representative of all other imponderable forces, we must concede the whole of its external nature as involved in the struggle between light and gravity, between the forces that strives toward the extraterrestrial and the force that makes Earth's substances tend towards the center. We have here the polarity between light and gravity, and in between that which perpetually seeks the balance between the two and manifests mercurially. For the mercurial element is simply something that continually seeks to maintain a state of equilibrium between light and gravity. Just as we are able to link the individual planets with the metals, as I have already described, so we can also establish the relationship of the sun to gold. The ancients actually prized gold not for its material value, but on account of its relationship with the sun. and with the balance between spirit and matter, we should recognize all that we divide and separate on earth, both in our thoughts and in our actions, in nature is actually united in some way or another.
Exactly. Now, if we go back for a second to Edgar Cayce, if the gold in the heart, which is really, that's the throne you sit on, that's the throne you put your God on. Who's your God? So the question is, who do you have sitting on your throne? Christ, Lucifer, Ahriman, your own personal ego? That's up to you. But if you have Christ on the golden throne of your heart, then you are a citizen of the sun. As Steiner just indicated, you're no longer just a citizen of the earth. Now, coming out through the heart can be extremely dangerous because that's also how you contact hypnotic forces, autosuggestive forces, subconscious and unconscious forces. And I assure you, most of us are not ready to deal with those forces, because to get there, you have to go through hell. You have to jump into, like Empedocles, into Etna. You have to jump into the volcano. You have to be like Hiram and jump into the brazen sea to go down to meet Cain, because we're all Cain. And our emotions, collective emotions, create volcanoes, according to Rudolf Steiner. They create the weather. They create what the sun gives us as a response to what we give the sun. And you can see that in the aurora borealis, as the breath of the sun is lighting up the ionization of what humans are taking to the core of the earth and then out through the north magnetic pole. You see, and then it appears as a mirror image in the aurora australis. But the aurora borealis is an image of that. And where is that happening? That's happening around your pineal gland. So as a clairvoyant, I could look into someone's head, and if they didn't have a little rainbow coming off their pineal gland, well, they needed to do a little more work. So this process that Cayce would take, he went unconscious. I learned really, really early on, don't ever do that, because when you wake up, you don't know what you've done. So who the heck was in you? Who was in control of you? For instance, for all you people, I'm going to say something very insulting to people who love alcohol. When an alcoholic gets drunk, they all act exactly the same. The very thing that John just described as the negative effects of the human solar plexus of the heart. And why is that? Because there's spirits in the bottle. You've taken in a poison, you can't digest it, another spirit comes to dwell in you. And so literally in the morning, when you wake up from a really good drunk experience and you don't know what you did, that is correct. You didn't even do it. You let a demon come in you. And these demons are the dead people who never got over their alcoholism, who are now, instead of in hell, they have risen above hell, just like our computers bring up minerals into the realm that make them look as if they're alive, like a plant, or even sentient, AI, like an animal, or even an ego who tells you what to do because of the calendar in your computer or your phone. Okay, so we are giving ourselves over to a subnatural realm that has risen up. So you don't have to go into a cave anymore. You don't have to go, but it's really good if you do experience the rumbling of the earth, because then you'll realize that the earth is a living being. You are walking on the back of a living being. And basically, those beings who have fallen into those realms, they're not happy campers. They're not people you really want to have dinner with, okay? And they come up in every way they can, and they try to pull humans into that realm. And so initiation is an awakening, conscious experience of what the solar plexus can do when the ego leaves the body. But if you do it like Cayce did it, even though he did good things, most of his predictions are 100% wrong about physical things that were supposed to happen on the earth. A lot of his stuff is wrong. When he stayed in the realm of the physical and he was working because he himself had healed himself from an illness through the same process and going unconscious into the realms of under the earth, basically. But now a master, being an initiate, can take those and transform them. But that's very rare to meet those kind of people. Cayce couldn't do that, but he read the Bible once every year. That's all he ever did. He read no other books. He read the Bible from beginning to end every year. So he had to read huge passages every night, and he was 100% dedicated to Christ. And that's the reason he was able to be a healer. How could Daedalus do it? He didn't do it by going into a trance, going into unconsciousness, hypnotic, autosuggestive, or anything else. It was 100% conscious. He took the picture Paul Scorpion handed him, looked at the name Douglas Jude Gabriel. That he captured my vibration, figured out what my vibration was. And then he knew that quantum entanglement, because the love on that picture sent to Daedalus gave Daedalus all Daedalus needed to have as a direct way to go through what they call subspace.
Holding, touching something with my cross-material hand, something cross-material, I get feelings. Why? Because in my cross-material body is also what I call the body of the feelings, the etheric double, and the psychical body, exactly in the same form as our material body.
Or spiritual space, or quantum entanglement, whatever you wish to call it, is also the ethers. And remember, your initiations are also related to the ethers: warmth, light, sound, and life. That is earth, water, air, and fire. So as these initiations are happening, and as a person is looking at this, Daedalus could look at this and say, oh, I feel this. His vibration's not in tune. So I'm going to grab a colored ball that relates to what his problem was. Now, obviously, we've discovered, it's funny, these interviews have made me discover all kinds of things recently that I never knew. So it's most interesting. So Daedalus might say, what's wrong with this guy? Well, obviously his astral body and his etheric body have come apart and he can't get them glued back together. And so he grabs the ball for that, sends that energy to me, and bingo bango, after I'd already tried literally everything I could think of, everything the doctors could do, everything osteopaths could do, chiropractors could do, healers. I went around to all the healers before John and Barbara, and I'd gone to Europe. And I saw Dr. Frommer, and I saw Dr. Wolf, and I went to Holland and England, and then finally to Switzerland, and spent $20,000 for a month of them shooting me up with mistletoe. And I came back, I was a little bit better. That's all.
So, what are the mediums? Are there sincere and real mediums who can come in touch by the vibrations? Just creating the vibrations to the same with that. Are there mediums on earth? Yes, of course they are. Those who by nature or by practice, sitting for development as they say, they become self-conscious of their etheric double, because that's the in-between. They can just be in attunement with entities or beings. Entities or beings. I will explain that. Living in the psychical world.
Matter of fact, I was still convinced I was going to die. And John knew this. He saw how messed up I was in those days. And so I said, before I die, John, I've already promised people I have to write a book to help Waldorf teachers get started with first grade. I know I'm not supposed to write a cookbook for Waldorf teachers, because then they would string you up with a threefold noose, hang you. That's supposed to be a joke, threefold, because everything's threefold in anthroposophy. So anyway, they'd chop you up into 3 pieces if you made one of these. Well, I made one of them, and it sold so many copies. I don't even know how many free copies have been used, or I know how many were sold, and it was a whole lot. So basically, I'd say it's probably the most popular book that I've seen, because I created a foundation that created the Waldorf e-library. And on there, that little book, Spirit of Childhood, has had more copies made of it than any other. It's like 5 times more copies than any other book, including all of Steiner's pedagogical lecture series. But anyway, the point is, I came back and I said, I got to write these books. And another ulterior motive was, I was trying to get healthy. So when I returned, I had Bobby turn me on to every chiropractor. everybody, Good Heart students, everything you can possibly imagine. And between John and Bobby and Barbara now, any kind of healing, whatever, they can tell you, they can turn you on to the treatment, the system, the pill, the whatever. So I tried it all, nothing worked. And so I thought I was dying. So I had to write these 2 books. The first book was to help Waldorf. Second book, well, that'll be in next week's talk, or next time when we talk. The second book, remember why, once I got inside of the very cube that Saint Germain describes as the inner chamber that you get into for initiation, it said, you need to have a baby girl. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. I'm clairvoyant. I would never, ever get in a situation accidentally or on purpose that I would have a child. And so I didn't get to see the full vision then. It took like many years for me to actually go back and remember what the vision really told me and what I really saw, but I didn't cognize. So even though you get initiated, it may take years to figure out what that, like particularly what that vision showed me. But any kind of initiation, it could take a long, long time to figure it out. So I wrote the second book, Goddess Meditations, which John has poems in, and Robert. And what I did is I went through every single book that Robert had, and that's a lot of books, and pulled down. And literally, I wasn't even able to walk at that time. And I was pulling down every quote that there was on the primacy of the goddess. In other words, the triple goddess, but also that every single traditional world religion in its own texts, in its sacred document, states that it did not start in any sense of the word with a male god or a male trinity. No, it started with a female ocean, or the female darkness, or Nyx, or chaos, or, and then later the egg. And so when you look back at all these, they all say the same thing. So we put that in that book. And I said, if I am supposed to, because I'm dying, so I probably only have a couple more minutes to do this. If I'm supposed to find the 12-year-old girl that God told me I was supposed to marry and have a baby girl with, like those, what God told me all those years ago, a baby girl. What's this thing with a baby girl? I didn't know what any of that meant. Then I thought maybe it's my own self, my higher self, or maybe it's the goddess.
Every time you tell the story, you don't hear it the way it could be perceived. You were not a 40-year-old man hooking up with a 12-year-old girl.
No.
But you need to be clear about that.
12 years later,
she
walked in to a talk I was doing.
Your former wife was 12 years younger than you. But
15.
When you married her, she was
24.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
She was actually 25 and I was 40, 15 years older. But yes, it does sound like I'm
that makes a difference.
Well, mind you, when God showed me this person, I said, hell no. And I forgot about it. Literally until I'm dying. And then I'm like, well, how am I supposed to draw this person? I don't know how to find this person. I'd moved back to Detroit because that was the area. I knew she'd be, 24, 25 years old. I thought that was insane. Why in the world would a 25-year-old woman marry me when I'm dying? And I looked really bad at that time. I mean, it was scary, even for, don't look in the mirror. But anyway, so I wrote this book and said, if I put this book out, perhaps she will come to me. And in fact, the first talk I gave on it, she walked in the door, and I didn't realize it was the 12-year-old girl. But I knew instantaneously, literally, voices started speaking to me saying, this is the person. You really can't avoid this. I kind of tried to avoid it, but I couldn't avoid it. And then I couldn't avoid the first, second, third, or fourth child. And the fourth child was the girl. So I had to have 3 children. And now I understand why that too, because when I was in the cube, the girl baby I was holding, I didn't notice that in the other 3 corners, and there's a blank corner, there were 3 other children, male children. So many, many years later, I realized that 12-year-old girl was this woman who walked into the room as the response to writing the book. And I realized that there were 4 children I was told I was supposed to have. Now, if I had known that it was 4 children, I would have done something very dramatic to make sure that never happened. So you see how the spirit works? And then the illness, what did the illness do? It made me come back to tour. I was never going to leave the big island of Hawaii. I didn't care if I died there. I was happy to die there, as a matter of fact. I thought I was going to die there when I was 35 and basically did. And then did die again in an MRI machine in Hawaii. And then died in Seattle when I drowned in this tub. And then had another near-death experience. I don't know, they didn't document it, but it was through the treatment that I went through in Holland, where literally they said my heart stopped again. So literally I had to die 3 times and then think I was dying before I would wake up, because as John said, he didn't mean to refer to me as being, thick-skulled and stubborn. I'm sure he wasn't referring to me or all those other list of things, which did sound like me when I was young, but anyway, so that's what can happen. You can be awake and not in one of these trances like Edgar Cayce, go through this stuff and still not understand it for many years. Now, I'm expecting Tyler to jump in and say, yes, that's exactly right. Because when you have the Damascus experience, it can take the rest of your life to understand it.
Yeah. When it comes to you, it is unlike anything you've ever experienced. I mean, you don't even know it's going to happen. You don't even know that there's such a thing that could happen to a person. And it has taken years to unpack it. 39 years, actually. Next year will be the 40th year. And how you do it, because you can't see it, it's so big, you just have to keep following your heart. Your heart is your compass on your path, on your spiritual initiation. And if you're concerned about which way to go, you check in with your heart. It's always good to be reading spiritual things and keeping yourself as virtuous as possible. And your heart will guide you to the next step. And when you get to your journey, down the road, you look behind you and you will realize you have always been guided. You have nothing to fear. Fear is what keeps you from walking down the path to evolution. And that's why the globalists continue to put lies and propaganda and fear in our world, because that keeps us from moving forward. So the thing is, you got to bust through fear. Do as much as you can to make your environment as safe as possible so that you can relieve yourself of many fears, like, keeping your pantry full of food and things like that, right? But then just take your warrior stance and get through the fire, walk through the volcano, whatever. You did it physically. The rest of us do it emotionally. John does it psychologically and spiritually. Sorry, I'm preaching again.
Don't be sorry. That was beautiful.
It's what we are faced with right now in the world. And we need people to get through it.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner, he says, the human heart is a product of gold which lives everywhere in light and which streams in from the universe and shapes the human heart. You have had the representation. Light quivers through the universe and light carries gold. Everywhere in light, there is gold. Gold lives and moves in light. And when man lives on earth, you know already that it changes after 7 years. His heart is not composed of the cucumber and the salad and the roast veal the man is meantime eaten, but these old teachers knew that the heart is built of light's gold, and the cucumbers and the salad are only stimulus for the gold weaving in the light to build up the heart out of the whole universe. I have described how modern philosopher comes to admit to himself, where does this intellectualism lead? To build a gigantic machine and place it in the center of the earth in order to blow up the earth into all corners of the universe. He admitted it is so. The others do not admit it. And that's from his book on color. So all these artists out there that have read this lecture cycle thinking they want to learn to paint watercolors are confronted with these types of ideas that are so powerful, they live in you for years until they bear fruit.
Since the time of Christ's incarnation, the mystery of Golgotha, the core of the earth is a gold ball, according to Rudolf Steiner. It is gold. It is not iron, nickel, and it's not a black hole, and it's not. But the gold is somewhat like the white hole of the sun, because as John has pointed out through Steiner's indications there, that the sun and gold are linked, and they're linked to your heart. I take colloidal gold for my heart, and I seem to be getting better all the time after they told me that my heart was going to kill me too. But anyway, so when you're going through you go through 9 stages after you die. You go through Moon, Venus, Mercury, and then you go through 3 stages on the sun, 3 times around the sun. And then you go to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, stop, look out at the stars, turn around and create the body for your next incarnation. On the way out, we leave behind the gifts that we are giving to those spiritual beings who've been connected to us through those parts of our body. And we have a 9-fold body ourselves. It can be described in different ways, but 9-fold is one of them. I'll say in a second. But the point is the central aspect of the sun. We are sun beings, just like bees are beings of the sun. And someday we will be like a spiritual beehive. And we will be connected to other people. And through the work with other people, we'll be able to create, progenerate. We'll be able to create children through our own speech, through our collective working, when we rise up off the earth and start to receive from the sun the full impact of what the sun has to give us, which is kept out of the earth by the ozone, which acts like a mirror, and our atmospheres, which act like a dampening down system. But when the time comes, we're simply going to live off what the sun gives us. And so we need to be prepared for that. So in the human body, we've talked a lot about the 3 lower parts, the physical, etheric, and astral. And then there's 3 parts to the soul, which can be combined into one and called ego. And then there's 3 parts to the spirit, called spirit self, life spirit, and spirit human. Those 9 levels, because the ego is sentient soul, intellectual soul, consciousness soul. That's where the ego hangs out a lot, but it isn't. The ego can leave your body. The ego can go into your 3 higher spiritual selves. The ego can go into your astral body and separate it from your etheric body, or can go into your astral body, then go into your etheric body and go into your physical body. And when you do this, you are entering into literally the inner layers of the earth, and they can be very detrimental to you if you have not solved the issues of your chakras from your heart down. So your foundation chakra, your sex chakra, your energy chakra, the chakra right below your solar plexus, if those aren't tamed, you have wild volcanic explosions happening, and your ego gets caught in your solar plexus. And so when I worked on people a lot, the solar plexus would be clogged because, just like Tyler said, they had so much fear. And when the fear is locked into a pattern in your body, it gets locked right into your heart. And a lot of times that's put there by your family situation, your friends, things you've gone through. And so you think it's perfectly good, right, to be fearful of all these things. You can't get into the spiritual world with any fear. You have to surrender yourself over to something that you have so much faith in that you know that it cannot harm you, even if it looks like Empedocles jumping into boiling magma, which, by the way, you can't walk across. But if you get metal feet, maybe you could. So the metal is the secret of all the future. So the gold, John's focus on gold today, we are implanting those little pink drops I've talked about in the treasure box of the heart that Steiner calls, also the box where your karma is stored. That's going to be directly related to gold in your blood, and the way that we can use gold as something that energizes that particular chakra, those nerve ganglia, if you will. And the gold is a way for us to directly contact Christ. So you gather all the gold you can from love and from wisdom, and you build this throne for Christ to sit on in your heart. And then you don't need to enter into the subterranean realms of the earth. It's not actually a good thing unless you're an initiate. And when you get ill, you basically need to relax into it and accept it. So people have said, you know, really, what was going on there? Well, I was taught by some amazing masters at one point when some of the pain came back because of medications I started taking, which was foolish. This person taught me all you have to do is take your ego and your desire body and take it out through your solar plexus and have it stand outside of you and look at your etheric body and physical body and say, oh, well, isn't it too bad? The pain's still there, but I have severed myself from it affecting my emotions or my ego. And believe it or not, folks, that actually works. And that is also something Father William taught me. When someone is unconscious, it's very easy. And he did it. I wouldn't do this, but he did it. He would literally take them out of their body. So they'd be screaming with pain. We'd go into the hospital room and he'd do some things over their heart and pretty soon the person would stop screaming. And he never really explained to me what he did, but I could see what he did. He took their consciousness and kind of raised it outside of their body. So it was a nice peaceful realm. And then their very, very painful body was no longer connected to it. So that might be an answer to the question that people have asked. And that's what I think after all of the reflections that I've had recently about these things, that in a way, I probably chose all of this illness. And I chose it to wake up because wisdom is crystallized suffering. And because I was probably too stubborn to understand that when I wished to leave my body because I had such a strong death wish, it would separate my astral from my etheric, which would create illness.
I know we're going to wrap it up, but I do want to say that, yes, indeed, Douglas has been very ill since we married in 2012, and he's had a series of bouts where I just felt like everything in him just fell back into hell again. But then I noticed a pattern. He would go through these bouts, and then when he would come out, he would be so on fire to write the next book, put together the next project. And by the way, we have about 40 books stacked up that John's going to be helping us edit over the next few months. We're going to start putting these out on Amazon because we don't trust, of course, all of this material being left on the internet. But if you are going through difficult times in your life, dear cats, it's probably because you are going through a process of initiation. And when you reach your depths, and it may happen over and over again, you will emerge with something higher and wiser to present to yourself and to the world. It just happens.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And I guess we have our work cut out for us once again. But I want to thank everybody for stopping by. And Douglas suggested in closing that I share the alchemical poem by the Comte de Saint-Germain. But rather than read Manly Hall's translation from the French, I'm going to read my own translation from my first volume, The Arcana of the Grail Angel.
Oh, I want to say something too. Your book is getting republished, isn't it?
Yes.
And we're going to make it available on Amazon so people can grab it. And I think that the first book is so voluminous that we're going to be putting that into 2 volumes.
Yes, it's going to be in 2 volumes. And I'm trying to come up with the modifications that make that possible as we speak, and work on Douglas's next book. And
I will be back here to crack the whip.
So if somebody tried contacting me and I haven't been able to reach them, I've been a little bit busy. So here we are, the alchemical poem by the Comte de Saint-Germain, curious scrutator of the whole of nature. I have known the great all, its principle and its end. I have seen gold in its power deep within the mine. I have seized its material and surprised its leaven. I explain by what art the soul within the mother's womb makes it home, carries it out, and as a grape seed placed against a grain of wheat under the humid earth, the one plant, the other vine are the bread and wine. Nothing was, God willed, and nothing became something. In my doubting, I sought out that on which the universe is poised. Nothing appeared to sustain the equilibrium or serve as a support. Finally, with the weights of praise and of blame, I weighed the eternal. It called my soul. I died. I adored. I knew nothing more.